All right, we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you all for joining us this afternoon for part 2 of our 3-part workshop series about grant writing for the Special Projects Grant Program. I'm Karen Maynor. I'm the Director of Grant Making at CultureWorks. So hopefully we've had a chance to meet at some point. If not, it's a pleasure to share this virtual space with you. On behalf of CultureWorks, before we get started, I do want to once again thank the Montgomery County Arts and Cultural District and the Board of Montgomery County Commissioners for making the Special Projects Grant Program possible. Thanks to their support, we have $250,000 available in grant funding for this year's applicants, and we are also able to provide opportunities like this one today to help everyone who's applying for grant funding this year get some additional support and guidance to make sure that you have the most competitive, compelling grant proposal possible. So one quick logistical note before we get started, you probably noticed that today's session is set up as a webinar. So that means that as an attendee, we cannot see or hear you, although you can hopefully see and hear us. So Ara is going to talk a little more about the structure of the meeting, but you can send questions using the Q&A button or the chat button down at the bottom of your screen. So I am joined today by a really wonderful human being, a brilliant nonprofit management expert and theater production expert who combines years of experience into coaching small nonprofits on how to increase their funding capacity. Ara Beal also serves as the consultant at Greene River Consulting and has served the arts community as an executive director, board member, community volunteer, and grants panelist. So Ara brings brilliant insight to this process, both as an applicant and also as a grant panelist and application reviewer. So she's going to have some really great information for you today. I don't want to hold us up. So Ara, I will hand it over to you.
Well, thank you, Karen. That was a lovely introduction. I feel like I have a lot to live up to today, but we're going to do our best. I think we're going to do it. So today's session is measuring and evaluating project success. So let's go ahead and dive in. So a little bit about me. As Karen said, I've worked here in the Dayton arts community, a nonprofit arena, for over 25 years. That includes running 2 youth theater organizations, one here in Dayton and actually one up in Cleveland. But I have served as a grant reviewer for the Ohio Arts Council, CultureWorks, and Arts Midwest, in addition to writing grant applications for the majority of those funders as well as other funders such as community foundations, the National Endowment for the Arts, and a whole other gamut in between. I currently also work with GrantStation.com's online education team, so I bring some of the things I've picked up there to our session today as well. Just a little note, I did just get back from a week in Hawaii, so I think right now it's 10 a.m. and I should be drinking coffee on my porch, local coffee on my porch. It's not what I'm doing right now. So if my brain's a little slow today, I hope you'll forgive me. If you want to connect with me, I always like to know what's going on in the local arts community. So if I can support you by attending an event or anything like that, I definitely like to do that. So you can connect with me on LinkedIn. The link is here, but you can also just search for Ara G. Beal. There aren't a lot of Ara Beals in the world, so I'm pretty easy to find. The other thing I just want to mention real quickly before we move on from the about me, a lot of my background is in arts education. So a lot of my examples today are going to draw from that experience, and measuring data and gathering data and assessment in the education realm is a little bit different than the more general realm, but I will try to balance my examples and hopefully you'll be able to apply whether you're working in the education realm or in the more general realm. Okay, so I always like agendas. I have a rule. There's more than 3 people in the room, you need an agenda. So we're going to have one today. So I'm going to spend about 45 minutes talking and hopefully having some participation from you too. I hope you chime in the chat. And so we're going to talk about goals and how you can reasonably set them as pertains to projects in general, but to particularly, of course, this grant that we're all eagerly working on. We're going to talk about how to gather data and what type of data to gather and when you should gather it. And then we'll talk a little bit about how to use your data, not only for your final report for this grant, but just how you might be able to use that, of course, in a larger realm. Hopefully, we're going to then have about 15 minutes of questions. So as Karen mentioned, if you have a longer question, it'd be great if you stick it in that Q&A section, because that kind of pins things and allows Karen and I to go back and find them. If you have a quick clarifying question, like if you want me to explain something again or maybe clarify a term, please feel free to use the chat and ask Karen to just sort of wave at me, and I'll stop and see what's coming in there. And then of course, please feel free to talk to each other in the chat, share ideas. If you have something to add, I want everyone to feel like they're participating here today. I certainly don't have all the answers. I'm just the one who put together a nice presentation about some of them. So before we get started, I think it's always important that everyone is using the same definitions for words, and we're going to have a conversation like this. So I'm just going to go through some really quick things. I assume these terms are familiar to you. If not, let me know and I can do a little bit of a longer definition. So goals versus objectives. Primarily when people are talking about those, particularly in project building and grant writing, goals are your longer term, sometimes more abstract ideas, and your objectives are the smaller sort of steps that you take to achieve that goal. I am going to use these somewhat interchangeably today because I don't want to get too stuck in the weeds on that. Primarily I'll use goals, but I'm not necessarily going to keep that clarification for us as we move through. Qualitative, of course, is related to the word quality. So any qualitative data is going to be something that's descriptive. It's going to be more abstract. Things like inspiring, enjoyable, thought-provoking are all, of course, those qualitative types of descriptions. And then quantitative, of course, comes from quantity. So those are things that are more concrete and measurable. How many people were at your event? What were their ages? Those types of that data. And then demographics, of course, are what types of people. Usually we're using our identity categories that we've all kind of decided on. We'll talk about that a little bit more later. But again, demographics are sort of what types of people are involved. Assessment is used primarily in educational settings, but again, we're going to look at what have people learned. It's a way of measuring. It usually has a before and an after. We'll talk more about that. So you can actually track growth. And then feedback is just a very general term. So any information that people provide to you about your project at any point all sort of count as feedback. And one of the things we'll talk about today is how to maybe expand our minds beyond what people sometimes get trapped of in the narrow thinking around data collection and feedback and evaluation of their program. Okay, now we're going to dive in. Real quick, I just want to, this idea that measuring and evaluating really is storytelling, because what you're going to do with your data, what you're going to do with your evaluation is you are going to tell the story of the success of your program to your funders, to your audiences, to your board, to everyone. And I think as people who work in the arts, we're all fairly familiar with storytelling, whether we're theater artists like myself, whether you're a painter, a writer, a musician, right? You're always trying to convey an idea, a concept, a feeling, something to an audience. The arts is a very audience-centric field. So if you're a little nervous around data, and I think sometimes us artists get a little worried about math and those more like as we think of kind of right-brained things, just remember really what you're doing is storytelling. And data collection, if you want to even extend it, you could think about like going out and gathering things that you're going to put together into a collage, right? What story are you going to tell? What do you need to tell that story? Okay. So I hope that all of you walked into today's session with these two things already kind of outlined, right? Theoretically, you have a mission statement for your organization. You might also have a strategic plan, or maybe even something a little less formal about what you want to accomplish, what you want your organization to accomplish. And you have a project, because I know you had to have one to make it this far, at least a general idea. So what is your goal? Well, your goal is actually what's going to connect your mission to your project. It's what draws the line between what you're hoping to accomplish and that big overarching idea of your mission to how this particular project, this particular thing you're doing is going to serve that larger mission. So that's really what we're looking for, is that connective tissue between the big idea and the nitty-gritty project, okay? You might have heard of SMART goals. I sort of adjusted this to SMARTY goals. So SMART goals, of course, there's a couple of different variations for what the letters stand for, and I could probably give an entire webinar on this. So we're going to go over it a little bit more quickly. Specific. So you want to make sure that you know exactly what you want to measure. They need to be measurable. So you need to be able to say, well, somebody grew 2 inches because we measured them, right? They need to be attainable. And this one is I think one that gets really tricky, particularly for us in the nonprofit world, particularly as we're talking to funders. We have this idea that funders want that we really have to sell ourselves to funders, right? Like that we really have to convince them we're going to do a lot of good with their money. But the fact of the matter remains that this is actually a fairly small grant amount. So no one is anticipating that you're going to solve child poverty in Dayton with a grant this size. So make sure you're matching your goals with your budget size. That's a mistake, or not a mistake, that's a misstep that I often see in applications, is people get think a little too big without zooming back in. Relevant, we're going to talk about relevant in a minute, and time-based. So this grant has a specific period, right? Your project needs to be completed between July 1 and June 30th of 22 to 23. So it has to be done within that. And then you want to, of course, make sure that you're going to be more specific about exactly at which points in the process you're going to collect some data, and we'll talk about that as well. And the last, I added incremental, because again, this is another sort of misstep that I see grant applicants make, where they are so focused again on that larger mission, on what they want to accomplish, on the great things that they're going to do, that they're not thinking about what is just the next step in this process, or maybe the next 2 or 3 steps. You know, if you've never offered after school programming before, you probably don't want your goal to be to reach 3,000 kids next school year, right? Like you probably want to start a little smaller and reach 30 kids, and then you can build. So that incremental I've kind of added, and I also just kind of like that it's SMARTY because it's like the candy, and I like candy. So let's talk a little bit more about some of these. So this is actually a great section for you guys to go ahead and find your way over that chat if you haven't yet. And just a note about the chat, by the way, you can decide who gets to see your message if you aren't familiar with that aspect in Zoom. So it should default to host and panelists, which is just going to be Karen and myself. Feel free to change it to everyone. You can also reply directly to people if somebody has an idea and you want to do that. So these are some common mistakes that I see in goal setting. So let's kind of take them one at a time. So one of the first that I see is that, and people never really say it this way, but this is what it boils down to, right? We're going to do more art and we're going to do it better. What might be the problem with that statement, particularly as we think back to that SMART idea? Not specific enough. Yeah, in both the more and the better, right? Like, what is more? and what is better? It's a very subjective term. Okay, so then I sort of just talked about this one. What might be the problem with we're going to end child poverty? That's going to be our goal. Not attainable. Yeah, definitely. Unfortunately, nor realistic. Yeah, there's a couple of those, and that's part of what I actually like about the SMART goals is they sort of work really together as a holistic idea. Great. And then this last one, we're going to teach 10 kids age 5 to paint with watercolor on Wednesdays in October. What's the problem with that one? There's actually 2. Maybe I stumped people. It's always hard to leave enough time for people to type, Karen, isn't it? Well, let's talk about the second part of this, right? Why, yep, why is, yes. Timeline too short. You know what, Christy? I'm going to actually disagree. I don't think the timeline is necessarily too short, nor the audience too small. You know, I write grants for $1,000 to $2,000 for arts organizations, and that's a very reasonable program to try to fund with that. But I think I know what I'm going to sort of vamp what you're saying and say it's actually too specific, right? What if we teach 9 kids, or if they're 5 to 7, or what if nobody wants to do watercolors because they're 5-year-olds? And they just want to like collage instead. What if we can't get our venue on Wednesdays? So that part is too specific. And that's one of the things that you need to do when you're working on a grant. And I'll tell you, it's also one of the things that really varies among reviewers. And that is, you have to find the spot between being specific enough that you're demonstrating that you thought through the logistics of your program, but still be open enough so that when things come along, like you suddenly can't use your venue on Wednesdays because AA is now going to use it and somebody booked it and didn't tell you, that you don't have to go back to your funder and say, oh, I need to change my grant agreement because we're not meeting on Wednesdays, we're meeting on Thursdays. So you want to make sure you're not too specific, but that you want to be specific enough. So for example, with this, you know, you might want to say, we're going to teach early elementary students basic painting techniques once a week during the month of October. So again, I don't know, I might even avoid October, right? In the late fall, mid fall. So that you have the essence of what you're doing, but you're not being too specific. And then the other problem with this is, what is teach? Do we expect these 10 kids after 4 watercolor exhibit classes to like be, you know, having stuff on display at a gallery? Or are we going to just teach them that it's fun? Are we going to teach them different color techniques? I'm not a visual artist, so I'm kind of making up these aspects here as I go. But you know, again, what is teach? That's not specific. So the first part of it is very, very vague, and the second part of it is too specific, and you're just going to get yourself into trouble. So when you're working on your goals, again, you want to find that spot in the middle. What is something that meets that smart, attainable, I can never remember the A. Smart, attainable, yeah, that's one. Measurable, relevant, and time-based, and also incremental. You want to be in all of those things, not just one of those things. Believe it or not, these are all sort of goals I have seen in grant applications. So they're tweaked a bit, of course, but you see a wide variety sitting on the other side of the table. So let's talk about the relevant part. I said we would talk about that later. And this is particularly true, not just, I think, of this grant opportunity that we're working on here with Montgomery County and CultureWorks, but anytime you're looking at something that's community funded. So your community foundations, if you have a local family foundation, they're often very interested in the local community, more so than maybe a national foundation or a state or federal funder. So relevant just doesn't mean relevant to your organization, by which I mean, of course, that it reflects your mission, right? You should never be doing programming that isn't connected to your mission, but also that it's relevant to the larger community. And the best way to demonstrate this is to include some research. So that larger community could, of course, be geographic, right? So like what else is happening in the Miami Valley, but it also can mean your community of other people offering similar services and programming. So if you, for example, are looking at, you want to start increasing your offerings for those who maybe have different sensory needs, there's tons of good articles and information out there about those sorts of programmings and what that needs. And it's very easy to just include those somewhere in your grant application. This does not have to be a formal research paper. You don't have to have a works cited, and we don't need to worry about whether we're using MLA or anything else like that, but just something that nods to its relevance in the larger community. Sometimes even in applications, I will nod to other larger organizations or organizations in other parts of the country that are doing similar programming that I know will have some name recognition. So, you know, that's always another possibility as well. but just something that shows that you've done some research and you're not operating in a vacuum. The other thing, of course, then is to talk to your constituents, to the people that you're serving, and make sure that they're interested. Particularly, please make me happy, if you are doing anything with teens, teens will not attend programming. They do not have a hand in planning. So please make sure you're talking to your teens if they're your intended audience, because they really need that buy-in at an earlier level. But just talk to people, make sure that they're interested. It's very common for people to start programming because they have a class for 5 to 10-year-olds and they have parents asking to have one for 10 to 13-year-olds because their kids want to keep coming. Include that in your grant application. That shows that you really are serving a need and filling something that people want, instead of just kind of doing what you think is your organization thinks is a good idea. So yeah, make sure you're relevant to us as a larger group. Okay, hope everybody's doing well. I think we're about ready to move on here. Okay, so please write your grant for the criteria in the grant application. Make it easy for your grant reviewers. This does not mean, please do not create programs just for grants. Don't do that. That is not what I'm saying. Please don't do that. All I'm saying is the information that you include, how you structure it, what goes in what section of the grant can vary from applicant to applicant. I sort of think about this, I'm sure we've all had an experience where we've had an experience, right? Where something has happened to us. And you tell the story of what happened to you to different people. And when you tell the story, you're going to do it in slightly different ways based on your audience, right? Like you might not tell your 85-year-old grandmother things that you would tell your peers or things that you would tell your kids, or vice versa, right? So all we're doing is tweaking our storytelling, as I said, all about storytelling, based on what the grant is looking for and how it's divided things up. And I can tell you, as someone who reviews grants, and I'm going through it, I'm trying to give people scores based on different categories. If it's hard for me to find the information, even if it's in there, we usually are looking at a dozen to 2 dozen to, I just sometimes have 50 applications to look through. So make it easy on your reviewers. And we're going to talk a little bit specifically about this grant then on that part. So the special projects criteria, oh, Karen, I was going to ask people to type in if they knew what they were, and I forgot and advanced the slide too quickly. So there will be no pop quiz today. The special projects criteria are project quality and artistic vibrancy, community impact and engagement, and the ability for the organization to complete and manage the project. I often see that people feel very confident in their ability to talk about project quality and artistic vibrancy. I think that's something that we all like to do, right? We like to talk about our art. The note that I have there that I'll just throw out there is that remember that the people who are reviewing these applications theoretically have some background in the arts, but might not have a background in your particular sector. So it never hurts to talk a little bit, if you're using a visual art technique that maybe isn't well known, just add a little definition right there. Because it just, you don't want to assume that people have the same level of knowledge that you do. And then actually, let's do ability to complete and manage the project. So this partly is the data collection, right? Because the reviewers want to know, the funders want to know that you are going to manage the project. And part of that is being able to track the success of the project. It's not just, do I think they have enough people to work the booth that they need to do this? It's also, do they have literature prepared? Do they have a way to organize those volunteers? Are they tracking their volunteer hours and making sure that it's being reported on their books? Which is a whole other thing we could talk about some other time. So those are all, so you can demonstrate your ability to complete and manage your project by having a good system in place for what goals you're reaching out, what goals you're attempting to complete, and how you're going to track that. And then this middle piece is the community impact and engagement. So The engagement was kind of what we just talked about, right? That relevancy. You want to make sure that the community is interested and engaged in what your project is going to be. And again, a good way to do that is to actually talk to the people you think will attend. The other thing you can do is, of course, talk to other people in the sector. I have a lot of conversations with people in the theater production sector here in Dayton about, what is the community offering well? What do we have a lot of opportunities for? And what are maybe some of our weaknesses? What are some things we're really lacking for? What are some opportunities we don't have? And I use a lot of that when I'm thinking about what types of projects I want to take on and what I want to do. So you can talk to both, of course, participants. You can talk to other people who are providing services. A note about that, I very much come from the abundance mindset instead of the scarcity mindset in my work, which means I know sometimes people feel they can't talk to other organizations about the work that they're doing because someone's going to steal their idea and then they won't be able to do it. And then they're in competition. And that's not the way that I see the world. I see that there is plenty of time and money and people and opportunities for us all to be out here doing great work. So if you're not comfortable doing that, I will acknowledge that there are people who do feel that way, but I've come very much from it from the other side. I'd really rather have those conversations. So then for community impact. So how are you impacting not just individuals, which is I think what a lot of us default to tracking, right? Like we're looking at those individual metrics across people, specific people, particularly if we're doing educational work. But how are you maybe changing the community on a larger scale? And that requires a little bit more creative thinking. And we'll talk about that here in a minute. You still doing good? I closed out of the chat, so wave at me if I need anything. So how do we gather data? I think every grant application I read says that it's going to email audiences a survey. I think that's the answer we all put. And that's great. There are some issues with using emailed surveys as your only data point. One is they skew very white people who respond to email audience surveys, because you have to, well, I mean, not necessarily as a corollary, but you do have to have internet access. You have to have time to do it. You have to have an email address that you check regularly. So they do really skew. The other is that in order to write a really solid survey, you actually have to have some decent training. It's very easy to write a survey that is either indicating to people what you want them to answer, or putting questions in a way that you're not really getting the information that you want. I am not a statistician. I just worked with somebody in public health, and she was always very adamant about survey questions that we wrote. So I sort of picked up from her the idea that, surveys can be useful, but are probably not the end all and be all that we like to think of them. So I'm not saying don't include an audience survey. I think if nothing else, it makes your audience feel valued and that their feedback is wanted and they know a place they can provide feedback. And I think those are all really valuable things to build that connection and that relationship. But I'm always leery of basing major programming decisions or anything else on emailed surveys because they really are limited. So let's talk about some other ways that you can gather some data. So your data should be like a stool, right? And that it should have more than one leg because otherwise it falls over. So let's talk about what some of those legs might look like. So there are different types of data, and we talked a little bit about some of this when we did our definitions earlier on. So there's that quantitative data. So that's just counting heads. That's counting dollars, right? It's usually very number-based. Where are people coming from? Are there more people? Are there less people? Are they staying longer? All of those sorts of things, right, that you can measure with that quantitative. The qualitative is, again, the descriptors, the quality of people's experience. And for those, you are going to have to ask more open-ended questions. And we'll talk about some of that. So those, I think, are things we all pretty much think of off the top of our head. when we think about data collection. But another that's really valuable is observed feedback, and not just from the participants, but from people in the sort of additional spheres beyond that. I'm going to talk, I have a whole slide about that we'll talk about in a minute. But you know, as you are at an arts event, you can observe, are there pieces of the event where there's a really long line, and are there parts of the event where there's nobody, right? Like, that's valuable feedback. People are interested in the thing where there's a line and not as interested in the part where there is no line. How long are people spending at different stations, different parts? How long are people spending walking through an exhibit? You can sort of tell these things and they become useful. Though again, of course, because they're observed, they're a more subjective piece. And again, you probably want to back them up with some objective data. You're going to put all these pieces together to tell that story, right? We're not just going to use one piece, but it is a really useful thing. And I think often underlooked because, you know, we are all experts in our field, and we all have had experiences where we've observed what's working and what's not working, because that's what we do. Anecdotal evidence. So again, these are sort of those open-ended questions on a survey, or if somebody comes up to you and talks to you, or sends an email or comments on Facebook. Some of these are good, as we all know in social media, sometimes they're bad. But again, you know, acknowledge it. And I always strive when I'm putting together a final report or any combining any data to make sure that there are some what we would call negative responses in there, because it shows that you're showing the whole picture. And it's okay if your programming isn't for everyone all the time. That's also acceptable. Sometimes that negative feedback will actually allow you to hone who you are and what you do and how you offer it better. So don't shy away from that. You also don't want to give those negative voices too much room in your reports, because we don't want it to come, you know, take on a whole other thing. But including some of that more negative feedback can be really helpful. So please encourage you to do some of that. So Likert scales, which you'll often see in those surveys, and I included those here for one particular reason. So that's like, you know, strongly agree, strongly disagree, or on a scale of 1 to 5, blah, 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 blah. And the reason I included those is I just learned this actually from a data expert I was working with, is never use an odd number in your Likert scales. So you shouldn't ever use 1 to 5. Does anybody want to guess why? Yeah, it lets people be neutral. And studies have really shown like that people, again, particularly teens, I work with teens a lot, will just go through and select the middle one and not think about it. So if you are going to use the Likert scale, make sure you're using an even number, so people at least have to pick a little side on one side of the fence or the other. And then this last type of data, another type of data that you can collect is, of course, demographics. And we'll talk a little bit more about how to do that and how to do that well. And I think we're all aware, particularly over the past 2 years, though probably over the past decade or two, there's really been questions about how we collect that data, what we do with that data. Are we making guesses about people? You should never do that. Are you allowing people to self-report? How are you allowing them to self-report? And again, much like the surveys we talked about earlier, how you gather that data, how you ask those questions can really actually make a difference in how people feel included and how people represent themselves. So I have some good resources for that we'll get to in a minute. I'm just making sure I have all of my notes covered here. Okay, so in terms of demographic, again, as I've said, if you're gonna write a survey, make sure you do some research. I really like Candid. If you're not familiar with Candid, oh shoot, it was something else before. And then it merged with GuideStar, and it's a nonprofit support organization. So they work with GuideStar if you are familiar and you have your profile up to date there. But they also have some really great resources, some of which are free. If you're looking for more learning opportunities, I definitely recommend checking them out. And just a little plug if I can, Karen, the guy whose first name is David, and now I can't remember his last name, who oversees all their arts and cultures offerings, is actually based up in Cleveland, and he offers some really good webinars. So even for specifically for the arts and culture sector, I recommend their stuff a lot. But they have this really great kind of white paper, I guess. It's a document, it's like 4 or 5 pages about how to survey for demographics. They are specifically working towards, because one of the things you do when you make a profile for them is you report the demographics of your board staff. So they have gone through and put together sort of a template for you to use to do that. But I find it incredibly useful because I know I sit down to write a question and I'm like, wait a minute, how do I want to ask people about their gender identity? What different ethnic and racial identities do I want to include? How do I want to word things? And I just find that the way they've gone through and broken it out to be a really, really great start. So Karen, do you have that link? Did you just put it in the chat? Look at you on it. Yes. So I wanted to make sure you guys had that link so you could go ahead and open it in your window. Every time I go to look for it, Google's always like, you've visited this site 27 times. So it's a really great resource if you're not familiar with it. And then, we talked about incremental and getting started. If you have not been collecting data, you are not going to suddenly, oh, I went too far. Go back one. You're not suddenly going to start collecting, tons of information about people. You just don't have the capacity for that. So don't set yourself up for failure and say you're going to do that. If you have not been collecting data, start by collecting zip codes. Everybody that you work with, everybody who works for you, everybody who's on your board, just ask them for their zip code. If you can, especially if you can get that +4, you are able to extrapolate so much data based on zip code. So if nothing else, do that. And you'll at least have something to start. Because, collecting data takes time to do well. It takes energy. It takes somebody to keep track of it, right? And somebody to do something with it. So start small. And zip code is going to be your best bet if you don't have those other things in place. I like this little image that PowerPoint suggested because it's actually a score. I was like, ooh, PowerPoint knows I'm working on the arts. So who to ask, right? So we talked about collecting. We want to make sure we collect a variety of data. We just kind of went through a bunch. And who to ask. And as I sort of indicated before, the arts have a built-in audience in a way that some of our other sectors don't. We have people who are coming to view our art, or we have people who are coming to make art with us. We have people who are maybe doing both. So this is an example that I have used in another webinar that I did that is not necessarily art specific, but I think translates really well. So let's say you're an organization that serves members of our armed services. I actually know of a local organization that makes quilts for members of our armed services. So we're going to pretend we work for them. So their direct service point is those people, those armed people in the service who they are giving quilts. And so they can survey them and they can ask them questions and they can get feedback from them, right? But we're all interconnected. And so there's ripples out. So maybe they also then want to talk to members' families about, is there a change in this service member? Has it impacted your family in a way that, we maybe didn't anticipate? And then the last is the military as a whole. Now, I don't expect any of us to reach out to the Pentagon or anybody like that, but you can talk to people who are higher up in the ranks and see if your service is having an impact. Another really good way to measure this is if people who are kind of in those additional spheres start recommending other people to you, right? So if you're serving people within this population and other people see what you're doing and start recommending you, that's a way to know that they're noticing, and you should probably reach out to them and say, hey, thank you for the recommendation. Can you talk to me a little bit about what you like about our program or what we might be able to be doing better? Okay. I think a really good example of this, again, I work in education, but I'll just talk as a parent for a moment. When my son was in the 4th or 5th grade, they did an all-school musical. It's a crazy project. I worked on that. It was crazy. But one of his teacher commented to me at our parent-teacher conference after the show that my kid was more focused in class on the days he had rehearsal outside of after school than he was on the days he didn't have rehearsal, and that she had even commented that to him. And they had a conversation about how when he felt like he had other work he had to do after school, he felt like he needed to be focused during school. So that is a great piece of feedback that does not come from me as a parent, does not come from the people who were working on the show, and does not come from the participant, but comes in that sort of sphere outside. So there's lots and lots of ways you can gather data. If you're doing a public art installation, I 100% would be talking to shop owners nearby about what are they seeing that's different. I would look at police reports. Are there changes in crimes and calls that are happening because of that? All of those sorts of things are an impact that your project might be having that you haven't necessarily thought to look into. So again, think about how you can flesh that out. What other legs can you add to your stool that are really going to make it that much more steady and sturdy? Because we're all doing this work. Like, none of this is about, is the work happening? Do we have a good impact? Like, that's not what we're here to talk about, right? We're talking about how can we measure it? How can we keep track of it? And how can we be creative in thinking about it? Okay, so again, to kind of go back to this grant and to go back to that community engagement piece, when are you talking to the community? And then how are you recording that data? So are you talking to the community just at your event? Are you talking to them before the event? Are you talking to them after the event? Are you talking to them before you even sat down to write that LOI for this application? When are you having those conversations? If you're looking at building a new program, and particularly a program that is going to be serving a particular population, I think it's always very valuable to have focus groups. Again, with the asterisks that focus groups can be, have some limited capacity for being useful. But, are you out there and talking to the population you're hoping to serve, kind of like I said about teens earlier, but also on a broader level, to make sure that they're really interested in that. There also might be people who are offering the programming that you think you're going to offer and you just don't know, which isn't to say you can't do it too, but you probably want to at least be aware of it. And then how are you recording that data? If you're doing a focus group, is somebody taking notes? Is somebody recording that? Or you just have a place when you jot it down that you kind of just have a running list, whether it's a Google spreadsheet or a notebook or something that's recorded in your staff meeting minutes. Make sure it's just recorded somewhere so you can go back and track it down later for when you have those conversations with people in the hallway or as you're cleaning up from an event. So make sure that you are talking to people outside and make sure you are keeping track of that. And again, it doesn't have to be a huge thing, but I can tell you that it really does strengthen a grant application if somewhere in the narrative you're able to say, we've created this programming because we had parents ask for a class for this age group, or the idea for this programming, the seed for this idea came when one of our participants stayed to help clean up and said, what I would really like to see is it's just going to show you're connected to the community, which, as we talked about, of course, is part of the criteria for this grant, the community engagement piece. And I've kind of hinted at this too. When are you talking to people? Are you just talking to them the planning process? Are you talking to them an implementation point? I think we're all very good. We're all very used to doing kind of the post-mortem, right? So I'm going to send you a survey after you've left and you're going to respond to it. But there's lots of other times to be talking to people. Lots of other times to send people, hey, I have a draft of a flyer about this event. Can you take a look at it and let me know what you think? Not so much from a graphic design proofreading standpoint, but it's really easy to tell when people are like, oh, this is awesome, this is really exciting, I'm going to put this on my calendar right now, to like, it looks good, right? There's some useful feedback right there, even if it's maybe not that quantitative feedback. So make sure you're including those voices as you're working on or you're including voices at different points in the process, not just at the end. Because guess what? By then you've spent the money and you've done the thing. So unless you're going to do it again, the feedback is not always as useful as it could have been earlier. So just remember, our stool includes a variety of data types, and we're going to get responses from a variety of people who are involved in the project with all kinds of different ways. And we're going to collect data at different points. So this isn't, we're just going to ask our audience, through one Likert survey at the end. That's not really what we're after here. We really want to make sure that we're getting a variety of information. And then we're going to talk real briefly, because I've been talking too long, about how to use that data. So we are, I'm assuming majority of us are artists, so I think we have some people from some community organizations here as well. So we like to make things look pretty. I think even those of us who maybe aren't artists like to make things look pretty. And the world, the computers, they do amazing things. There are amazing infographic templates on Canva. If you haven't played around with Canva, you should. They have a really great nonprofit rate where basically you get it. I don't know if it's for free, it's reduced, though I've also heard they've been taking a long time to approve people, but you can do a lot with the free version. I've made tons of infographics with them. Whether you're using Excel or Google Sheets, both of those have options to make different charts. And if you're overwhelmed, I know Excel will just recommend a chart for you. We'll look at your data and be like, I think you want a pie chart, and we'll make one. And you're like, ooh, it's pretty, it's different colors. And then you can play around with the features. And data represented graphically just has much more of an impact in your storytelling. So not only are you going to collect this data and report it back to the county and Culture Works as part of what you're doing with your final report, but you might as well use it, right? You went through all the trouble. So you can use things like these infographics. I'm going to show you a couple examples in your fundraising. You can share them with your board. You could use them in other grant applications. You can just stick them up on social media or your website and be like, hey, look at this pretty thing that we made, right? Like there's lots of ways to use this data. So the data collection, the analysis, the evaluation, it shouldn't be something that you're just doing to check a box on this grant. It's going to be a lot more valuable to you and actually to the funders as well, if it's more integrated in what you're doing. So this is actually, I got to this through Americans for the Arts. If that's not an organization that you're familiar with, you should be. They do a lot of advocacy and data collection around the arts and its impact in the United States. And I pull data from them all the time. So if you haven't ever looked at them, you should. They have some really great stuff that you can cite. Like that for every ticket that people purchase to attend an arts event, they spend an additional, it used to be $24 in the community, but I'm sure it's gone up. So like the impact, if you have 100 people come and you see your show, right, that's another $2,500 that's going into the local community. So anyway, so this is an example that I found. This one's not very graphic. It's kind of a little boring, but it has good data and it has these lovely citations. So, you know, it's definitely an option. And this is a better probably like annual report option than a like something you want to put on social media. Karen, you are just awesome sharing my stuff. I love it. Okay, this is a more graphic-y infographic, and it's actually about the franchise industry, but very easily could be about the arts industry. And it just sort of talks about, you know, how many people own franchises and what's their impact and where are they most often and what are their subcategories. So it gives you a lot of information. You don't have to read through paragraphs of data. So this is another example. And then this last example, I love this one. What does this graph tell you? I think it's something all of us in the arts know, right? That our audiences are aging and we're not picking up the younger populations. So like, it's not in black and white, it's in orange and green, I guess, but like, it's right there. It's very easy to see. It can be really compelling. So use your data afterwards, play around. I can get sucked into making graphs and infographics for hours. So sometimes I have to set an alarm clock for myself, but they're really, really great and fun. And I will tell you, as an executive director who has trying to communicate with a board, anytime I did numbers, I would always include a quick graph because some people's brains just really react better to that. I want to see all the numbers on a spreadsheet, right? But people want to be able to take a glance and see, you know, where are we in terms of how much income we thought we would have this year? We'll just make a quick bar chart. It's a lot easier than trying to do the math. So I think using these in whatever way you can once you have that data is really fun. You can do like the scatter plots with zip codes. Ooh, see, getting too excited. Okay, better move on. So just some final reminders, and we'll open this up for questions if there are any. You guys have been a quiet group so far, but that's maybe you're all thinking. So remember to write your goals based on your mission and project, but do focus on the grant criteria, which are, again, quality and vibrancy, community engagement and impact, and your ability to complete the project, right? Make your goals SMARTY. So you want to make sure that they're specific, they're measurable, attainable, relevant, timely, and I'm going to add incremental. This is a fairly small grant. This is not a end child poverty grant, right? Start collecting your data now. I was talking with an organization not that long ago, and I was like, oh, do you have any analytics from your website? Because they've been around for 7 years. And they were like, yeah, we did save all that. We haven't done anything with it, but we have it. And I was like, well, that's good, because you can't go back and find those web visitors later. Like, you got to start recording it now. So even if you're not sure what you're going to do with it, even if you're not 100% sure what you should be recording, start recording something now. And as I said earlier, those zip codes can be a really valuable place to start, because you can get a lot of information from them. And then have fun with how you use and present your data. Make some charts, make some graphs, put some colors on it. It'll be fun. I think I have one more reminder. Yes. And lastly, be honest, but rethink failure. I'll just end with a quick story. You should always be honest in your grant reports. I mean, like, honest within the parameters of what you're doing. So I built a program to provide performances for children on the spectrum, and it was a youth performance organization. So children performers performing for families and children. And we designed specific performances for those on the spectrum to come. And we were like, great, we're gonna have all these families come with these kids that wouldn't be able to come normally. It's gonna be fantastic. That is not what happened. We actually had a very small attendance from that population. But what did happen is all 30 of those kids that were in that show learned about what being on the spectrum was. The number of them that were like, oh, you know what? Somebody in my class does some of that. Now I kind of understand. And the number of them that would come up and say, I was thinking about this moment and I think it might be too stimulating and maybe we should change it. So we failed on the metric of getting these families to come, but we had an impact that we didn't even anticipate in expanding the knowledge and familiarity of among the children who were in the cast around the spectrum. So sometimes failure is okay. Doesn't mean you still didn't do good, and you can just have to kind of rethink about it. So do be honest, but rethink failure. Don't be so black and white about it. And I think that's it. I did throw my email up here. If you have any additional questions, feel free to shoot me an email. I do have that extra E in Greene for Greene County. But I'm happy to respond if you have anything else. And then Karen, we'll open it up to questions. We still got some time left, and I'm happy to stay a little bit past 5 if we need to. Do we have any good questions?
Yeah, type them in that chat or submit them through the Q&A. I will buy you just a little bit of time if your fingers are clacking away here. I just want to, first of all, Ara, this is so fantastic. And just to highlight some of what you were saying, those SMART goals are a really excellent way to think through the goals of your project. When you put it into your application, you don't have to spell out the SMARTI and list every single piece of it, but that's really helpful to give you a framework to build off of. And we actually, in one of the other grant programs we administer last fall, panelists talked a lot about SMART goals specifically. There were a couple of applicants who did a really phenomenal job of incorporating those into their applications, and panelists really responded to that. So it's a brilliant thing to refer to. And in general, yeah, just really be thinking about why do you want to do this project? Like Ara said, how does it tie back to your mission? What information led to you wanting to do this project, and why did you set the goals that you did? So all of this is really outstanding. I did drop one more resource in the chat. You know, when you're thinking about why you picked the project you did, where your goals are coming from, like Ara said, use a variety of things. Maybe you got feedback directly from the people that you serve. Maybe there's something happening in your community, an area of need that you've identified that this project is going to meet. And maybe you want to pull some national data. So I gave you a link to Americans for the Arts, which Ara mentioned, the Social Impact Explorer. It's this beautiful, maybe a little overwhelming color-coded wheel where you can click on different things like tourism and education, health and wellness, and you can see national data that organization has gathered about the impact that the arts have in those different areas. So, you know, as you're writing your application, you don't have to do a big data dump, but maybe you find this one little like juicy piece of data that would really kind of amplify the importance of your project. So feel free to browse that and pull from it. And I
Yeah,
saw a question. Oh yeah, sorry, go ahead, Ara.
no, I was gonna say it's just a great resource, and it doesn't. And I think we think sometimes about like when we want providing data or research, you know the impact of your work, right? Like you've been out there and you've seen it, but remember that the reviewers maybe haven't, and so you just get a little more credibility if you're able to point towards a study or an article or something. So the data doesn't necessarily have to be something that you don't know. It doesn't have to be a huge big deal, but just something that says, you know, yes, what my experiences in the field are backed up by this study that was done. So I think that's the other thing to remember is that the research piece doesn't necessarily have to be that, you know, you need a scientific abstract. It can just be
Yes.
a little bit. Yeah, the question is about a recording of the presentations, if we're
Yep.
making that available and how.
We sure are. We are recording all 3 of the workshops that are part of this series, and I am sharing them on the CultureWorks website. So if you go to cultureworks.org and then the apply for funding page, the special projects section will have a nice timeline where you can see the links to these as they're posted. So let me drop that into the chat real quick. It takes about a day for Zoom to process, so it should be posted up there tomorrow. And that's where it'll be.
You know, and Karen, since we have a little bit of time, I just want to make one quick sort of footnote, and that is, you know, we talked a lot about the data collection and evaluation around special projects grants. We didn't really talk about it in terms of capacity building grants, and I know that's something new for this program. And I can just say that a lot of times capacity building is a little more straightforward because it tends to be more focused in scope. I was going to say smaller, and then I was like, that's not quite right, right? So if you're doing capacity building, you're looking at, you know, maybe we're building we're going to redesign our website and social media presence, and so then you're going to track impressions and bounce rate, and you know, whoever's helping you with presumably you're bringing in some outside help. So whoever's helping you rebuild that website can provide some really great guidance on what are some things we should be trying to do better on our website, right? Like have that conversation. So in some ways, because capacity building is a little more straightforward, you do tend to have a smaller audience of people that you're looking at. Though the website example I just realized is maybe one of the exceptions to that, where maybe you are going to be asking lots of people for feedback on your website. But they do just tend to be a little more focused in kind of their objective and therefore their goal and therefore what you're measuring. But do make sure you're measuring it. You don't want to just, you know, again, say, we want our website to be better because, well, what is better? So yeah, just that little asterisk there.
Yes, that is an excellent point. Just a couple of reminders before we sign off for the day. There are other opportunities for you to learn even more about how to write an awesome grant application. We have one more workshop coming up. It is this Friday, which is April 15th at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. And that one is to focus on the project budget. So what do all of those terms in the budget spreadsheet mean? Some tips for how to shape a realistic project budget. It's going to be a great session, so sign up for that one. We'll also record it and provide it on the website after the fact if that day doesn't work for your schedule. Also, many of your organizations might qualify for free one-on-one grant consultation, and Ara is one of our grant consultants. So we have 8 excellent grant experts who are lined up to do these free 1-hour sessions with you to provide feedback on your specific grant application. So if your organization qualifies for that opportunity, you should have gotten a link to sign up for those sessions in the email that notified you of your eligibility. But if you've misplaced that email or you want me to send you that link again, just reach out to me and I'll put my email address in the chat. All right, I think that's all I have for you all. So I want to thank you, Ara, so much for doing this. I said at the beginning, you're brilliant, and you proved it yet again, as you always do. So thank you for all of your time today, and thank you to everybody who joined us. We're so excited to see your projects.
I'm excited to do some one-on-one work with people and see what people are up to. And seriously, and if you are on LinkedIn and you want to look me up again, I just always love to hear about what's happening in our arts community. We have such a vibrant one here in Dayton, and I keep finding new things about it, which is so great. So yeah, so thank you so much for arranging this, Karen, and hosting. And I look forward to hearing from those of you who have questions, and I wish you all much luck on your grant applications, both here and otherwise.
I second that. Thank you all. Have a good rest of your evening and stay dry out there.